What is a declassified document that is so unbelievable it sounds fake? Story 1. Bat bombs were an experimental World War II weapon developed by the United States. The bomb consisted of a bomb-shaped casing with over 1,000 compartments, each containing a hibernating Mexican free-tailed bat with a small timed incendiary bomb attached. Dropped from a bomber at dawn, the casings would deploy a parachute in mid-flight and open to release the bats, which would then disperse and roost in eaves and attics in a 20 to 40 mile radius, 32 to 64 kilometers. The incendiaries, which were set on timers, would then ignite and start fires in inaccessible places in the largely wood and paper constructions of the Japanese cities that were the weapon's intended target. The United States Navy took control in August 1943, using the code name Project X-Ray. The U.S. scrapped the project after beginning the Manhattan Project. It's crazy that this weapon was actually developed and would have been implemented had the U.S. not developed nuclear weapons. Story 2. Project A119 was a top-secret study by the U.S. government to predict the effects of detonating a nuclear warhead on the moon, big enough to be visible from Earth. They wanted to do this because they thought the Soviets would be doing something similar for the anniversary of the October Revolution. It didn't end up going ahead because the study, unsurprisingly, concluded that this was a terrible idea. Two funny things about this. The Soviets were indeed doing a similar study that came to the same conclusion. The reason it was declassified is because one of the scientists working on this project was Carl Sagan. Sagan accidentally leaked the documents of this project after using it as evidence of his previous work when applying for a job years after the project ended. Story 3. The wreckage of the Titanic was found because the Navy was looking for the wreckage of two nuclear subs in the area. They staged the expedition as a private venture to find the Titanic to cover for the fact that they were actually looking for the submarines. They actually ended up finding all three wreckages, although they only reported on the Titanic at the time. Yes, little bit off, so hope you don't mind if I clarify. The Navy had always known where Scorpion lay. They found her shortly after her loss. The exact location, even to this day, had to remain secret due to the fact they were nuclear subs. Ballad was sent out because the Navy wanted to monitor the results, if any, of a wrecked nuclear weapon. And they still do. The U.S. still monitors to make sure the wreck isn't being disturbed or mined by foreign powers. That's the Titanic cover-up. They agreed to let Ballad use their equipment because a search for the Titanic would be a great cover for trying to photograph the secret location of the subs, which was the last time it was done that we know of. And then he found it. Story 4. Operation Mincemeat. A dead British officer washes ashore Spain during World War II with a briefcase of top-secret documents handcuffed to his wrist. Spain is neutral, but as a fascist nation supports Germany tacitly and allows them to photograph the documents before returning them to the British, so they continue to remain neutral. The documents detail an Allied plan to launch a naval invasion of Greece, an attack into Germany from the soft underbelly that is the Balkans and Hungary. The Germans eat the bait, and the Axis move forces to defend against this front in Greece. However, this is where the Allies reveal their trap card and invade a much more poorly defended Sicily. The British officer was a random Welsh homeless person who had recently died, who was dressed up as a British officer, given a fully detailed set of papers and backstory, including love letters and a picture of a girlfriend, some fake papers in a briefcase, and dropped off the coast of Spain by submarine. Story 5. Operation Midnight Climax and George Hunter White. If I remember correctly, the basics were that the CIA in the 1950s wanted to research the possibility of using LSD for mind control. Consultant George Hunter White was given the task, so he would host dinner parties in his New York apartment and dose pitchers of martinis with LSD without the knowledge of his guests to see what would happen. One partygoer later stumbled into a hospital, not knowing what was happening to her and understandably thought she had gone insane, attempting to have herself committed. So things got too out of hand, and the CIA decided to pull back on the operation. White, who was apparently a big fan of alcohol and narcotics himself, moved the operation to San Francisco. He would hire prostitutes to dose their clients, while he watched the events unfold behind a two-way mirror. Apparently, he also sat on a toilet the entire time because he didn't want to miss a second of what transpired. Story 6. The Finder's Cult Documents. P1, P2, P3. A crazy amount of info released by the FBI about a cult with CIA ties back during the 80s. They abducted or otherwise obtained children that they used and made to participate in dangerous rituals. Repeated evidence of child using or neglect was ignored, and testimony of FBI or customs agents being told to back off by CIA members are documented. The CIA did even admit to working with the cult, but only under the guise of computer training. The cult operated under the guise of one of those New Age groups and suppositions that they were attempting to mold the kids into what they thought was a better form or put forth, swept under as just satanic panic, but was far from that. Story 7. Phoenix Program. Guantanamo Bay torture techniques were developed by the CIA Vietnam Phoenix Program. The Guantanamo guards didn't come up with the enhanced interrogation by themselves. They were taught. Before Guantanamo Bay, the torture techniques were used in Latin America. The picture of the black hooded man, La Capuche, standing on a box in crucifix style with dangling wires, was used in Latin America known as La Cama, after a captured Chilean woman. Story 8. CIA Project Dark Gene. Americans were desperate to fly over the Soviet Union and test their air defenses, which they had not done since Gary Powers was shot down, as well as gather signals information under a complementary program, Project Ibex, to allow jamming techniques to be developed. The idea is that an American pilot would be training an Iranian pilot, this was before the Iranian Revolution, in an F-4 Phantom or F-5 Tiger, and they would get lost and accidentally enter Soviet airspace. It went about as well as you can imagine, with half a dozen Iranian aircraft shot down, and all crews either ended or captured. Story 9. I don't know how much of it has been declassified in terms of actual documents, but Operation Gladio, anyone? Another one that, to this day, not a lot of people may know about, although it was briefly mentioned in Andy Curtis's The Power of Nightmares, was a book called The Terror Network, which was authored by a very suspicious journalist with very weird ties to Western states, or at least the U.S. state dept, and such, which alleged that the USSR was in charge of and or financed and worked with a big terrorist network that primarily bombed the West and other nations. Bill Casey, Reagan's first CIA director, had a special NIE commissioned to look into the myriad claims from the terror network. The resulting report basically concluded that Claire Sterling's book was only somewhat correct, if that, and contained many, many instances of misinformation elsewhere. Casey initially objected that in the first draft of said NIE, there was supposedly far less info on Soviet ties to terrorism than he read in Sterling's book, so he had it revised. Later, Melvin Goodman, head of the Office of Soviet Affairs at the CIA from 76 to 87, claimed that the terror network was basically just black propaganda that is basically almost wholly made up from the CIA itself. Story 10. You know that scene in Dark Knight where Batman gets pulled by the plane with the balloon? That was actually used by the CIA. According to the CIA, the Skyhook system included an aircraft equipped with steel wire-catching horns mounted on its nose, an electric-powered winch, a mechanical device used to pull in or let out cables, and a 50-foot steel cable, and a separate package of gear delivered by airdrop to let officers on the ground catch the Skyhook as the plane zipped by. The system was used successfully in 1962 when the Skyhook, or rather the Fulton Skyhook, named after its inventor Robert Fulton, extracted CIA officers and materials from an abandoned Soviet ice station that was suspected to have monitored American submarines. This was the first operational use of Skyhook, and it brought valuable intelligence on the USSR's Arctic activities. The CIA started. Story 11th, Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods was a proposed false flag operation against American citizens that originated within the U.S. Department of Defense of the United States government in 1962. The proposals called for the CIA operatives to both stage and actually commit acts of terrorism against American military and civilian targets, blaming them on the Cuban government and using it to justify a war against Cuba. The possibilities detailed in the document included the possible assassination of Cuban immigrants, sinking boats of Cuban refugees on the high seas, hijacking planes to be shot down or given the appearance of being shot down, blowing up a U.S. ship, and orchestrating violent terrorism in U.S. cities. The proposals were rejected by President John F. Kennedy. Story 12. The Stargate Project. It ran from 1978 to 1995 and was created by the Defense Intelligence Agency, and I think in the later years it may have moved to CIA, to research the possibility of using psychic phenomena for military intelligence. They mostly focused on remote viewing and ESP, and by the end they had a team of about 20 psychics. It got terminated and then immediately declassified in 1995 when the CIA claimed the program had never produced any accurate information. Story 13. If someone made a spy comedy movie based on the Newberg missile theft, it would probably be so wacky that viewers couldn't believe it was based on an event that really happened in the 1960s. There was this disgruntled German Air Force pilot who had some money issues too. So he one day decided to steal a Sidewinder air-to-air missile and sell it to the Soviets. Stealing the missile was the easy part, but a Sidewinder is quite big. So how could he transport it? He pushed it over the military base's fence and wanted to pick it up there, but soon found out it was too big to fit in his car. So he smashed in the rear window and drove off, with the missile sticking out of the back of his car. He drove quite some distance like that on public roads, visible to everybody. Now he had successfully stolen the missile and stashed it somewhere. But how could he get that damn thing smuggled into the Soviet Union? He put it in a crate and sent the crate by mail. Just imagine what the Soviets thought when he, sometime later, told them and wanted his money. Because, of course, weeks later, the crate with the missile hadn't arrived yet. Did the police or customs find the missile? Did an intelligence agency investigate the theft and have them look out and eventually find it? So you'd probably think, and that's what the Soviets thought too. But in fact, the crate just got sent to the wrong address and ended up in Copenhagen instead of Moscow. Then some Danish postman realized the mistake, and with some delay it was sent to Moscow for real. And quite soon, the Soviets equipped their brand new MiG-21s with brand new knockoff Sidewinders. Of course there was an investigation, and of course the traitorous thief was caught. Some of his accomplices too, but only long after the fact. And that's why we know all of this today. Story 14. Conplan 8888 is a legitimate U.S. plan for zombie apocalypse or zombie virus. This plan goes into detail about what the U.S. will do. The primary focus is to not paint the U.S. as weak during this time and show the U.S. is still red and ready to hold off against any attack. The plan talk about multiple direct types of zombies. The undead rising from the grave, chemical zombies. Hell, even witchcraft zombies. All of which the U.S. has plans for and knows how to beat, except witchcraft zombies. They have no clue. This is a legitimate U.S. plan. Story 15. The CIA has been running MK Ultra on me since 2020. Don't be deceived, MK Ultra never ended. My name is Chingun Chinbat. It has been happening to me in Chicago where I live. The Chicago Police Department, local FBI, and military are all involved. They constantly keep me under surveillance. I have not done anything wrong. It is a covert program to neutralize good people. If you look online, you'll see that it is an epidemic that has been affecting many other innocent Americans. This crap is being run out of fusion centers. This covert genocide program is also known under names COINTELPRO, Gang Stalking and Targeted Individual Program. If you read this, educate yourself and spread awareness to as many people as possible. Innocent Americans are getting murdered, especially because they use directed energy weapons on us to give us diseases. Story 16. The CIA has numerous documents available to be read online, saying the average Soviet citizen consumed more calories than the average American, that gulags are just regular prisons, that capitalists needed to create a Bolshevik party of their own, stuff like that. Deep analysis of Lenin's writings that sound like something a Marxist would write. Also, research about people who can travel back in time to different worlds. I forgot the word they used. Maybe remote viewers or something similar. They seem to be impressed with their performances. MKUltra was the largest research project in the history of the world by money and participants. 98% of that research is still highly classified. Social engineering created the world we live in today. This society didn't naturally develop this way, as we are told it did. Also, the American military nearly collapsed during the Vietnam War. That was in a U.S. Army military journal. The analyst says, this is the worst military since the Tsarist army of 1917. You know what he means by that. Story 17, CIA's Gateway Experience, basically confirms time travel, at least partially. Of course, there's a lot of nuance and speculation, but regardless, it's a pretty crazy read. The final page has since been found and released. You're not missing much anyway. But if you find yourself at the end of a huge cliffhanger, know the final page exists and well, find out for yourself. Story 18. That movie, The Men Who Stare at Goats, was based on a true story. The book is fascinating. It's all about secret programs, exploring paranormal and psychological warfare to end wars before they start. The programs were a direct pushback from the brutality of the Vietnam War, and much of what was learned shaped the U.S. enhanced interrogation tactics used in the Iraq War. Story 19. NASA once tried to train dolphins to speak English by giving them LSD. One of the researchers in this study fell in love with a dolphin and was fired for, well, doing the deed. The dolphin ended himself. Then there's all the CIA's wacky attempts at assassinating Fidel Castro. Some of it reads like it was ripped straight from a Looney Tunes short. Exploding cigars, exploding oysters, shaving his beard to make the Cubans revolt against him, that kind of stuff. Obviously, it was all either too absurd to go through with or failed. Story 20. There's a declassified government document that shows the science on how it's possible for humans to astral project themselves through walls. It has to do with aligning all the chakras in a certain way. It's been a long time since I've read the document, but it's something along those lines. It was done for the first time back in the 50s, and they have been able to replicate this experiment with a man and his dog successfully going through the wall in one piece. Story 21. Project Azorian was a CIA operation to retrieve the remains of the Soviet Golf-class ballistic missile submarine K-129. It sank in the North Pacific while on patrol, resting on the seafloor about 3 miles down. The CIA and DoD believed that a salvage operation had the potential to retrieve nuclear SLBMs, nuclear torpedoes, code books, and cryptographic gear from the wreck. But the Soviets often patrolled the spot to prevent the Americans from doing exactly that. The CIA was ordered by Henry Kissinger to collaborate with Howard Hughes to set up a false flag deep-sea mining concern, which involved the construction of a huge, purpose-built ship called the USNS Hughes Glomar Explorer. It had the outward appearance of a deep-sea mining vessel, but concealed inside was an enormous moon pool with a giant claw that would be lowered down to grab the wreck and pull it up to the surface. Allegedly, they did snag the wreck, but the claw suffered a malfunction halfway up, causing a portion of the hull to fall back down to the seafloor. The details of the portion of the hull that was actually recovered and what exactly was found have never been officially disclosed. Kissinger authorized a second attempt, but before that could be effected, the LA Times broke a story about the operation, allegedly sourced from a memo that was part of a cache of documents that was stolen from a Hughes office some months prior. The operation now being fully blown, the Soviet Navy stationed destroyers at the spot to prevent the Americans from trying again, and Kissinger finally nixed any plans for further attempts. The Wikipedia article on this operation hints that allegedly the front part of the hull was recovered, including 2 intact nuclear torpedoes and the sonar dome, and that the part of the hull containing the nuclear-tipped missiles, code books, and cryptographic gear was lost due to the claw malfunction. It also hints that the claw malfunction story may have been a fabrication, and that all of the sought-after sensitive material had been recovered and covered up, presumably to preserve their advantage thus gained from its study. The remains of 6 Soviet submariners were also recovered and given a burial at sea in accordance with military convention. Story 22. The pardon of the Japanese who ran Unit 731 in exchange for their findings. They performed countless experiments on live human POWs, cutting off limbs to test blood loss, injecting them with diseases, and seeing how they progressed when left untreated, vivisection of these same individuals, and other really disgusting stuff that I don't have the stomach to type out. You can Google the rest. The US government felt it was more important to have that information in American hands than to let it go to the Russians or be lost. You'd never be able to conduct those kinds of experiments again. And for good reason, so they considered it the lesser of two evils. Story 23. Got to be the one about remote viewing aliens in the late 80s. There is a document where a remote viewer, like a psychic who travels space and time, is commanded to try to view Galactic Federation HQ. The guy describes a huge structure with towering corridors and alien figures. It wouldn't be all that weird had the ex-chief of Israel's space security, a very decorated and respected figure in the field, not echoed the language of this obscure document by coming out a few years ago and claiming there was a galactic federation of alien races that humans weren't allowed to join because we weren't worthy yet. He claimed there's a base deep within Mars where American astronauts work alongside the Federation. Story 24. It's not the CIA, it's the FBI, but I have nowhere else to put this information, so I'm going to put it here. Years ago, I got into it online with someone who insisted that the FBI archives admitted that the Reich survived World War II by escaping to Argentina. I was an undergraduate history student at the time, so I had some training about using digital archives like that, which the FBI operates. I decided to dunk on this guy by actually looking where he told me to look, and I found the funniest thing I have ever encountered in my time studying history. See, the FBI did actually look into cases where people reported seeing the Austrian painter. Throughout the late 40s, 50s, and even the 60s, there were dozens upon dozens of recorded cases where FBI officials were sent in to investigate reported sightings. A vast majority of the time, it was from hotel clerks or people staying at hotels who saw a German man checking in to stay. I don't know why. Germans in hotels checked off H boxes for a lot of people. I found one specific case where an older German man and a younger woman checked into a hotel and were reported to the FBI. Someone thought that it was him with Eva Braun. The FBI showed up, and like a lot of these cases, they just talked to the people. They didn't spy on them or anything of the sort. In most cases, it seems like the agents were well aware that the chances of this being the Reich were almost zero. In this case, it was a German man and his Colombian wife. Doesn't seem unusual until the agent reported that the two of them were Bahasts and that they didn't even speak a mutual language. They communicated with each other entirely through body language, context clues, and a spiritual connection. The agent seemed convinced that they showed genuine affection for one another and were utterly harmless, so he let them go about their business. I don't know why, but this case really tickled me. The image of some 50s FBI agent sent to track down the Reich, sitting down, and having a polite discussion with a bizarre pair of international lovers who couldn't even talk to one another is funny. Story 25. The Watergate scandal represents one of the biggest political controversies of the 20th century, revealing a sequence of corruption and cover-ups that went all the way up to President Richard Nixon and led to his resignation in 1974. The affair began in 1972 with the arrest of 5 people following a raid on the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. The men were found with thousands of dollars and a book. The FBI connected the burglars to then-President Nixon's re-election campaign, and in 1973, a U.S. Senate committee was convened to investigate the circumstances of the burglary. Most of the media ignored the scope of the case, so the investigation by the Washington Post's 2 young journalists, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, increased public interest in the scandal and its political and legal repercussions. Their reporting was instrumental in uncovering a massive campaign of political espionage and sabotage by the campaign to re-elect Nixon. Woodward and Bernstein uncovered evidence that senior government officials were aware of the break-in at the Democratic Committee headquarters, attempted cover-ups, mishandling of funds, and destruction of incriminating files.